Good. Well, let's get going. So first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the time zone you're connecting in from. It's really great to meet all of you, and we really do appreciate your time and your investment of time to join us today for a topic that is really important. And we're here to talk about Atlassian governance and more specifically Atlassian governance best practices. My name is Dietmar.doerschlag. I'm based in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, southwest corner of Canada. And I'm a Valiantys business consultant focused on the Atlassian ecosystem. And it's an awesome application space that I work in, and I really enjoy working with our clients. And I have been involved in various projects where governance is really, really important. And that's why I'm really excited to talk about this. Bonnie, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Bonnie.beyer, and I'm an engagement director for Valiantys. I've been in consulting since 2019, so I actually started doing this pre-COVID. But before that, I was in avionics for 22, 23 years. Uh, so my mic drop moment is that I wrote the software that lands the 737, and I worked for a company that kept all of you safe in all your travels. Um, but my passion grew when I led that company through an agile transformation and the Atlassian tools modernization. And it was a brand new learning curve, exciting new world for me compared to embedded systems development, which is its own fun beast. And so I had so much fun doing that. Now I like to do it for clients. And so that's who I am.
Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about Valiantys on the next slide, who we
Yeah,
are.
let me point out quick,
Yeah,
Mar, we're not actually using slides. I don't know how many of you are using cloud products for Atlassian, but the cloud Confluence gives you the ability to use your Confluence page in presentation mode. So that's what we're doing.
exactly. Yeah,
I love
awesome. Thank you for that. So quick word on who we are, and then Bonnie and I will both share a little bit more as to why both of us are really passionate about this topic of governance and how we personally came to that topic. So we represent Valiantys, and Valiantys is really Atlassian's first global partner. We have over 600 team members in various geographies across Europe, North America, and also Asia Pacific. And we are really 100% dedicated to the Atlassian ecosystem, which means we are privileged to work with clients in many, many different industries, really helping them business transform using the Atlassian toolset. And that includes, obviously the core Atlassian products such as Jira, Confluence, Jira Service Management, which is an area that I work in a lot. It also includes, of course, migrating customers off legacy systems, which could be ServiceNow, Zendesk, Sharewell, whatever they are, or maybe migrating them from an existing on-prem data center Atlassian footprint into the cloud. Uh, One thing you might not know is that we also have a full stack development center of excellence. So we do a lot of development that hooks into the Atlassian ecosystem. And our client base is really very diverse. We work with many large organizations that you would probably be a customer of, and many of them are Fortune 500 companies. So we really enjoy working in that ecosystem, and that's what we do 24/7. So in the next slide, um, governance. Now, let me share a little bit why governance is really near and dear to me. I've been in IT my entire career, starting in the mid to late 90s. And most of my career was really spent in IT project, program, portfolio management. And of course, I was really trained on this triple constraint in project management that we are managing projects, satisfying our end users with this focus on a go live, that we delight our users with the system that goes live on time, on spec, on budget. And that is really important. But that is actually a rather short-term lens because the products that we are building and that of course includes the Atlassian products, they live for a really, really long time. And we better think through how we keep the lights on and how we keep that system, that product that we're building really optimally tuned, and everybody knows their roles and responsibilities with respect to the systems that we're building. So I became very passionate about that topic of governance, right? Really ensuring that you have a clarity of roles and responsibilities as to who is doing what in your ecosystems that you are building. Now, governance is not government, right? Very different. Um, you are undoubtedly involved in many governance conversations, not only in your professional life, but also in your personal life, right? If you go to a school board meeting, if you attend a church, if you in a book club, whatever, you always have governance that comes into play. So it is something that you are inherently dealing with both personally and professionally. So Bonnie talked a little bit about your journey coming out of the engineering world. Why was governance really important to you? How did you come to this topic?
Well, it's funny because when I was at my former company, I got thrown over the wall from shared service from engineering over to shared services to manage that new Atlassian system. And they were already practicing very good IT governance over their system. So I learned it from them. And then when I became a consultant, I thought everybody did that. And I started learning, no, that's not the case. So many of these systems start out as grassroots. They're owned by various groups, and then it gets thrown over to IT, and IT has to clean up the mess. Or they're smaller companies, and they don't really know uh, about good IT governance practices. And so I see a lot of client systems, and it's like, oh my goodness, that's the wild, wild west. So that's when I started really getting on my soapbox about it. So yeah.
Yeah, very, very true. Yeah. So let's talk first on the next slide, Confluence page here, a little bit about what governance really is. Now, I'm going back to December 2008 when I had a job interview entering a very large organization in the British Columbia public sector. And it was a large mass transit agency, actually one of the largest in North America. And funny enough, the question that they asked me in that interview was, what is governance? What do you know about governance? And of course, as I interviewed for a senior project manager role at that point in my career, the question was really, really relevant. So what is governance? So the definition that you see on the screen, I think makes a lot of sense, right? It's really the process of decision making, right? And how you enforce decisions that are being made. You cannot let, as Bonnie said, the wild, wild west rule. You cannot have in a massive Atlassian ecosystem, everybody do their own thing. So you need to have terms of references, how decisions are being made. And that is really, really important. And you need to think this through well before your system goes live. So some examples are listed here that I'm sure speak to you. So you need to have some rules of engagement around your development practices, right? Are you using a Scrum iterative methodology? If so, how does this exactly work, right? What about configuration management, right? Where do you keep your assets, right? And who is responsible for keeping assets updated and current, right? Um, I'm sure your organizations use enterprise tools that hook into the Atlassian ecosystem, right? Many of them, your IDP, your identity provider, your mailing system, your maybe records management solution. It goes on and on and on. And you need to really have rules in place on how you decide on how this entire ecosystem works. So few really, really important points as far as best practices are concerned. So you see it says here representative decision making. good governance doesn't mean you come down with the hammer. Well, maybe sometimes a C-suite member needs to come down with the hammer, but that is really not the general rule. You want to make decisions that are representative of the various stakeholder groups in an organization. So important here is that you want to have all the stakeholder groups represented in the decision-making process. And we talk about this in a minute here when we talk about the governance committee and who should be on that committee, right? So if you work in, as I did, in a large organization, we had 8,000 employees, and it was actually 4 operating entities in the parent company. You want representatives who, from all those organizational entities, that use those tool sets represented in the government's decision making. You want to apply a system thinking approach that's holistic. No system ever operates in isolation, and certainly not the Atlassian ecosystem. So if you make a change in one system, undoubtedly that will have downstream effects on the other system that's connected. So you cannot only look at the Atlassian suite, you need to look at other systems that connect into Atlassian. And the third bullet is probably for me, and I think Bonnie agrees, one of the most important ones. We don't talk about the tools first, JSM or Jira, Confluence or not Confluence. We don't talk about the tools first. We really talk about the people first, because at the end of the day, it's always the people that use those tools, right? And I need to really understand where those people come from, what their passions are, their dislikes and likes are, their stakeholder interests are, and I need to really understand those people. And once I understand who those people are, then I'm driving the process that I'm implementing. And only once we have agreed on a target process would I then really touch the tools. So it's not that the tools drive the process and the process drive the people. It's really that the people drive the process and the process drives the tool, right? And that really relates to also the last bullet, is that we need to have emphasis intentional change management in place. So when I talk about change management, I am not referring about IT service management, change management. I'm really talking about what I call the people side of the change, right? Because it's really people that use technology. If you are standing up a new system and people only find out about that new system on go live day, we have really missed out raising that awareness of why that new system is being implemented. And if you haven't raised that awareness, well, people probably are reluctant initially, really wanting to use the system. They don't have a desire to use the new system. So I hand it over to Bonnie. Bonnie and I have both been involved in large programs, and I think we both recognize that governance cannot really be addressed without also talking about the intentional change management. Bonnie, you want to comment or chime in on that topic?
Yeah, well, so one of the things that I often have to clarify for people is governance as a word needs a qualifier. What are we governing? If it's a lean agile center of excellence, your LACE, they're probably governing your agile methodology practices. If it's the Atlassian tools, change control board or advisory board or whatever you're calling them, they're governing the Atlassian system. The federal government's governing the federal rules and they're governing the country, right? So governance really requires that qualifier. So we can't just say that's governance. That's Atlassian governance, or that's agile methodology governance, and so your governance practices in your organization are distinguished that way. But when it comes to governance, it really boils down to 4 key elements, and that's intentional decision making, designing your system the best way you can upfront. And then there's how do we support the people? How do we support the end users of that system? How do we train people? How do we enable them in that system? And how do we manage change management and communication planning? So those 4 key aspects of governance are really what we're talking about when we describe Atlassian governance. And so why do we care? Why do we care? Well, if you are struggling to get the value out of your Atlassian tools, if you're struggling to track the life cycle of your developments, if you're struggling to get the proper reports that are needed for executive visibility or to manage dependencies and schedule and risks, that is why we care. When you have a lack of good governance over your system, it very quickly gets out of control and causes you to not get the value that you've been sold and told that you would get. And it's very likely because Atlassian provides all of this capability for all of these great customizations and ways you can go in all kinds of different ways in your configurations. But if you're not governing that so that you're not doing everything all at once, but instead focusing in on what is the right thing to do, then you're actually cutting off your nose to spite your face. So if you follow these good practices, you can improve that operational visibility. And so,
Absolutely.
yeah. And Dietmar, tell me about this.
Yeah, so let me maybe touch something more personal here. Why do I personally care about governance? And you can maybe relate to this. So for disclaimer, this is not a picture of my garage. I just took this picture off the internet. But what you see in this picture is the absence of governance, right? So here's someone who is a mountain climber, just like me, who likes to be out and scale peaks, and that's how they prepare for their major climb. And what you see here is chaos in the absence of calmness, right? And that is a real problem. If we approach system implementations and system sustainments like that, well, it's pretty difficult to find stuff, right? To be organized and to make sure that you don't forget anything as you embark on this long-term sustainment journey, right? Which is what governance is all about. So it's chaos. So next slide is how things are much better organized, right? So right picture, yes, that was me some, few years ago. I don't tell exactly how old I am, but it was not yesterday, obviously. And on the left side is how you would prepare for a mountain climb, right? You have everything neatly organized, you have it thought out, and you go on that journey with minimizing the risks because you have thought everything through. Now, does that mean that risks, unknowns never pop up? Of course they pop up. That is a fact of life. But this picture, right, reflects calmness. It is the absence of chaos. You have thought things through before a system is turned on, right? You have really thought it through. You have prepared yourself, prepared for the eventualities. That's what this picture really reflects. So this is, from my personal space, but I thought I wanted to share this because this really reminds me of how it translates into Atlassian governance, right? Bonnie, do you have any ugly pictures from your garage you want to
Hmm.
share? I don't think so. We
I was
keep
just
this.
saying my office is out of control right now.
Right. So let's talk about one example real quick of how chaos, the absence of governance, could impact the organization. And we refer to this as the hidden cost of data chaos. So this is a report that Valiantys did a little while ago, and we focused on this data aspect, right? So what's the connection between governance and data? Well, if you have a messy system, right, where processes are not being followed, which of course means that the system ends up in a misconfigured status or state, right? You don't allow people to use the system effectively and efficiently, right? And that results in a lot of opportunities that are being lost, right? And this is what this slide sort of speaks to, right? I mean, you might have a brand reputation issue, right? You might have a customer satisfaction issue. You know, if you run an external service desk and your system is in a total disarray, people will not receive the services that they want to receive, right? So this is really reflective that where lack of governance will cost you dearly just on the data side. If we go to the next slide real quick, um, it's not only the absence of governance does not only increase your cost, so the absence of cost reduction. Very often we put systems in because we want to be more effective and more efficient, i.e. we want to reduce cost. And if you put a really great tool such as GSM, Jira, Confluence in place, but you don't have that governance in place, I don't think you do yourself a favor because you're not allowing yourself to reduce that cost, right? But it's not only the cost reduction that gets missed out, you really also put yourself in a position that you don't seize on those market opportunities that you have, right? Suffice to say, many of our clients serve tens of thousands of customers, right? Many brands that you would know and you personally do business with. And if you have a really bad experience working as a client with the Atlassian systems, then you also unfortunately eliminate that opportunity for market potential. So that's where really the absence of governance really meets dollars and cents. Bonnie, if you want to chime in on any other thoughts on that topic, I'm sure you have experienced this in your practice as well.
Well, opportunity costs are always, if you're spending time doing something that you don't want to do, overhead activities, then you're taking away the opportunities to pursue new opportunities, new capabilities, new customers, and so we're always looking for ways to reduce all of those extra overhead and to improve our automations and our automated reporting, so we can free up our people to be able to make the most of their time, which is serving, in our case, serving our clients. So,
Yep.
but yeah, it's does any of these sound familiar? In your Jira system, do you have dozens of issue types or hundreds or even thousands of custom fields? Are your workflows out of control? Either individual workflows like this crazy one. This is from our Jira Hall of Fame, where we saw this workflow from a system once, and it was like, wow. Or you just have so many different workflows. And if you're a Jira admin and you're trying to maintain those, you know how error prone that can be. If every different issue type and every single different project and team has a different workflow to maintain, a simple change that needs to propagate across 30 different workflows is very error prone. If you have hundreds of statuses or even dozens of statuses, in my opinion, that can be a problem. I'm a persnickety person when it comes to how you do your workflow management, and I'll talk about that later in the demo. Schemes. How many schemes do you have? If you have hundreds of schemes, you probably have a wild west system. So, and then admins. How many cooks are in your kitchen? We have a benchmark of the appropriate number of admins is around one admin for every 300 to 500 end users in the system. How well does that match up to your benchmark? If you have dozens of admins for a system that has 500 to 1,000 people, then you probably have too many cooks in the kitchen. And you might need to look at how you're governing the system. And so we have a listing here of those wild west symptoms here. Can you define what a Jira project, or what they're calling it in the future, Jira space? Can you define what that Jira project space represents? Does it represent a team? Does it represent a product? Does it represent a product line? If you don't have a good understood definition of what a Jira project represents in your system, that's one of the root causes of these kinds of problems. But other things, do you have multiple versions of the done status that mean the same thing, like done and complete and closed and finished? I heard about it before, but I hadn't actually seen it until recently. But do you have a done status? As in, it's not just done, but it's done. I actually have a client that has a done status, and I've heard of it being done too. I've
That's
seen
awesome.
canceled with a single L. I've seen canceled with two L's. Really, the statuses can get out of control. And same as resolutions. And do you have admins that have been properly trained? If you haven't given them the proper training, then you're really setting them up for failure anyways, and it's not fair to them. And so there's common challenges that we see, and so there are answers to these as well, and we can help with that. And so
on here that you read the term board, and board sounds, pretty, I don't know, Senate committee like. Okay. Use whatever term you want. But of course, to talk about the framework of decision making, you cannot talk about this without talking about who is involved. And these are some thoughts that we have. So when you set up a committee, a board, a steering group, whatever you call it, right? You need to really have the right people on it. Now, as I said in my introduction, my background was over many years in project and program management. And I was fortunate to work in an organization that took governance very seriously in the project context. We always had what we call the project or program steering committee in place, and they met on a regular basis, right? And the role of the project manager was to help them make risk-based decisions, right? Which is not different from what we're talking here, right? So who is involved in an Atlassian governance board? You need to have someone who owns the application space, and we call this the product owner. Now, the term product owner obviously comes out of the agile world, right? Even if you don't adhere to a Scrum, let's say, textbook methodology, even if your environment leans itself more to a waterfall kind of approach, even though I know Bonnie and I are big proponents of agile, hint, hint, doesn't matter what the methodology is. You need to have someone who owns the product, right? You need to have that person at the table. And that would probably be a really good role to chair that committee and make sure the committee stays engaged, meets on a regular cadence, doesn't fall to the wayside, and people really make it a priority, right? And then it's also a really good idea to have what we call product admins in that group, right? If you have Jira and JSM, depending on your size, how you structure it, maybe you have different product admins for Jira and JSM. Maybe they administer both products at the same time. Regardless, those people need to be at the table because they have the insight into how the system is set up, and they can advise and or decide on changes that are being proposed, right? And then the third group here is you need to have engaged representatives from across the organization. I used to call them the local change agents, right? Very often those would be business representatives. So if you use Jira service management, for example, heavily in HR, because you create an HR portal where mission critical HR requests are coming in, of course, people who are stakeholders in HR would have to be in that committee because they're deeply impacted by what the committee decides. So the activities that those committees is doing on this slide, it's pretty obvious. It starts with they set a vision, right? Why do we use this application suite to begin with, right? Like what is our vision? What do we want to do with that suite? And this really comes from senior leadership. They set specific goals, SMART goals that are measurable, specific, attainable, realistic, and also time bound, right? They set the scope of the responsibility and also discuss the support models. And if any significant changes are implemented, they make sure that they get assessed, vetted, approved, and only with approval implemented. And the changes are also documented, at least from the architectural perspective, so that there's a record of what was changed. And they would probably also meet on a regular basis to meet change requests that are coming in, right? So that a holistic assessment is made and changes are not implemented in isolation without really having thought through how that change impacts the entire ecosystem, right? So it's a very important group, and we think that investing your time in such a group will pay massive dividends because that creates clarity in roles. A system has a much higher likelihood of being well-tuned and running the way you want it to run well beyond the initial go-live date. So with that, Bonnie is going to now talk a little bit about how do you actually stand this up. So where do you start? And then she's going to do a little demo on some artifacts that I think you will really like. So Bonnie, back to you.
Yeah, so whether you're standing up a brand new site or whether you're just trying to establish some governance over your existing site, where you start is you set those goals. You need to define what are the different components that we're governing. So maybe it includes Confluence and Jira. Maybe it's your source control. Maybe it's your portfolio tools, your knowledge base. All of these different items go into what is the scope of our responsibility of what we're trying to govern. And then inside here, we have some of our goals. And these are not SMART goals, obviously. This is a much more generic, but we do want a scalable system. We want to have visible control by everybody in the organization that's representative or has their representatives on that governance committee or steering or whatever we want to call that group. And yeah, that's one of the other things you want to do when you get started is name group. And then, so you want to establish that vision and that purpose. And then after you've done that, your next step is to really start making some of those architectural decisions. What are the layers of scale of our system? What do we have right now? And then what do we really want it to be? And then what is our scope of responsibility? What is our Jira configuration structure? In other words, like I said earlier, how do we define what a Jira project represents? And then how are we laying out the data in that project structure? What are our different project categories? Maybe we have project categories for our teams, and we have another project category for our enterprise initiatives. Maybe we have to have different project categories for hardware teams versus business teams versus our software development teams. Whatever that configuration structure and project category structure, we really want to start defining that, build out our baseline, and then, of course, we may need to convert our existing projects over into that new configured baseline. Then some of the other things that they're going to do is they're going to figure out what are our program and portfolio requirements, because those are going to inform a lot of that decision making. If you wanted to use a tool such as Jira Align because of the certain requirements it's satisfying, there are impacts to your configuration requirements in your Jira system. Or if you've decided that you're going to go with a Tempo SPM solution, or maybe you're using something else altogether. But you want to understand what those program and portfolio requirements are when you're making those decisions. And then what are our customizations for the teams and our integrations and what automations and all of those different capabilities. So you're going to want to make sure, though, that you have a sound architecture for your data topology. And so that's one of the first activities that I would work with any group on when I'm working with them. And so Yeah, let me go into the demo. I can show you more of what this is about. So if you're not familiar with this, I'm going to go ahead and exit full screen mode. So this presentation mode on a Confluence basis is pretty handy. I like it. Can get rid of slides altogether. But right now I'm in my client demo environment, and this is what I call the Atlassian governance space. And so this Atlassian governance space is really a hub for that Atlassian governance board. And I've heard them called Jira advisory boards. Uh, there was a fun one I heard, I can't remember, it doesn't matter. Anyways, lots of great names that I've heard over the years. At my former company, the avionics company, we were just the ALM change control board because everything in avionics has to go through a change control board. So we were rather boring. But so be creative if you want. But what you want your governance board to understand is what is our mission and what are our operating procedures. And so an example here is we meet bi-weekly. We give our options and change requests, and we give the homework to review those options, have discussion, and then after we make a decision, then the admins will add that implementation to their queue. And so really this governance board also then would be fully documented as who's involved, who are the product admins, who is our product owner, who facilitates this, and who are all the different people that are involved in the governance board, and who are all the product admins. You might even have admins for people for your email systems or other integrated systems listed here as well. And then what's the scope of our governance? Which tools are we responsible for governing? And you would capture those here as well. This is really just an example space though, and I'll go through more of the examples. What I want to stress for a moment here is that this is just something to get you started. If you already want to have things in SharePoint, or if you want to have a separate space for different sections of this, like the Atlassian administration section, or the knowledge base, or the governance board, they can be separate spaces. They can be structured and documented in any repository you want. The most important takeaway I want you to know is that you do need this information, and you want it in a centralized location that isn't on somebody's hard drive or in some admin's head, because that admin's going to win the lottery and nobody's going to be able to find it on somebody's hard drive 5 years from now. So make sure that you have all of this captured somewhere. So this governance board space, though, we've broken it down into 3 sections. And so I'll come back to governance practices, but I'll start at the knowledge base. And so the knowledge base is where we try to capture all of the company specific knowledge base for the products that we're governing. And so the Atlassian documentation, they have fantastic YouTube, they've got fantastic documentation, and they maintain that. You don't want to recreate that into your own environment and then try to maintain it there. I've seen so many companies try to do that, and it's just a waste of time, waste of money. Instead, if there's things that you value specifically in their YouTubes or in their documentation, add those links to this and provide that guidance, but don't take on the job of maintaining it. But
which is exactly the reason why we never issue any user manuals, right? Because in cloud, they would be outdated the moment you publish them, because the ecosystem is constantly changing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And Atlassian, to Bonnie's point, really does big kudos, an excellent job with providing that information to you. I'm always surprised. You go out into Google Land and you search for something. It's very current. So really echoing that point, don't waste the time with that. Atlassian does it for you.
However, there is some documentation that you do need to create and that you do need to maintain. And that's your company specific decisions on how you've architected the system and how you want people to use it. For example, if you have sprint naming conventions for your Jira, you want to make sure you've captured that in a knowledge base. If you have certain ways that you want them to set up their advanced plans, or how they would use their structure, tempo structure, and how they would, or information about which custom fields are used for this type of activity and what the different values of these different custom field options mean. you probably want that kind of information documented. Same with Confluence. You might want to have your labels taxonomy, and you might want to talk about which are the most recommended or company-specific, company-defined page templates that we use. And then also, we want to have whatever information is necessary for the handoff between admins and end users about how our system's configured. And that would be, what are the different project categories in our system? And then how do we define each of these project categories? And so maybe the enterprise project template category is defined for portfolio and enterprise leadership. It's for the enterprise themes and portfolio initiatives, and products are identified through the use of this field or these components. And that's really helpful for them to understand, well, I don't want to request that. That's not the kind of project I need. I perhaps need a team project category project. But then they see exactly which issue types, workflows, fields, etc. Just enough information for the end users to know what different project categories mean. And so that's the knowledge base section. Then there's the Atlassian administration section. And I've seen, this is the place where I see people have it on a hard drive or in somebody's head or scattered across multiple Confluence spaces. And this is where really getting this all centralized will really help you. You want to, of course, have your naming conventions defined for all of your configuration elements and projects and categories. You want to have your runbooks for your common activities. Maybe these are being handled by certain support groups, but you'll want to make sure that you're having runbooks so that everybody's doing things the proper way. You'll want to understand, what is our change request process? When we're implementing something, where maybe we have a process where we're going to implement it in our sandbox environment, and then we're submitting it to a certain group where they do user acceptance testing, and then we're scheduling deployments with these types of communications. So those your change request process for implementation activities would be documented. And you'd have your maintenance activities captured. What are our yearly housekeeping activities, such as cleaning up our schemes or updating our quarterly increment or our quarters field options and archiving older options, or whatever those maintenance activities are. How often do we refresh our sandbox and things like that? So the admins have their section for all of their documentation. And then we have our governance practices. And this is where we get into those 4 key activities. We have our decision log, all of the decisions we make about how our system operates. We have our change management model, which really is broken into, we have our change request process, as well as our communication plans. And then we have our support model. How do we support our end users? And we have our training and enablement model. And so all of those are created and defined for that governance board to know exactly how they operate in their organization. And then that decision log is where we have all of those decisions about defining our baseline set. What is our baseline going to look like? What is our Jira project hierarchy? What are our different access groups? What are our project categories? This is one of my favorites. What are our Jira workflow starting and ending practices? Because I'm one of those people that believes that you should have a single common, oh, my image isn't going to load, a single common starting status and a dual ending status for all of your non-JSM workflows. Everything else in between is up for grabs for the different project categories, but it sure would be nice for all of your reporting if you always had the same dual ending status. Can you imagine how much easier your filters and your integrations would be if you didn't have to search across 20 different closing statuses? So that's all of these decisions would go into your baseline decision making, whether it's your project category structure, where we saw that image earlier, or your hierarchy and your workflow practices, your global configuration settings. And then once you have your baseline, you would have all those baseline decisions captured, and you would have, at that point, these would be implemented and you'd mark them as complete. But then as you get change requests coming in and you've got a new change request of something really big, they really want to have some sort of Gantt capability, or they really want to have this kind of reporting capability that's going to require a new BI tool solution or whatever, that decision log, then you can add a new decision using that template, the DASI decision template, and then you can actually capture the decision making and the options and the decisions. And so I really encourage you to, if you don't have all of these types of documentation, consider pulling this all together into a single environment and seeing where your gaps are. Along with that, we also have our implementation guidance for these products, which really represents maybe, I don't know, 50, 60 years of combined experience of multiple executives in our company now, but they've been working in Jira and Confluence forever, and we captured all of our best practices here for clients as well. So we use this
Fantastic.
as our way to work with our clients to build out their governance.
So maybe let me just chime in with two different approaches to governance and how what we saw with some real life examples. So I was privileged to work with a very large US client implementing JSM over a period of multiple months. And the solution we built heavily relied on automation. And the automation, we built over 100 automation rules, and the core components of the automation relied on the use of one custom field and a workflow status, right? And they went live. We, of course, use acceptance tested this whole solution. It went live without a single defect. And then our contract closed. And a month later, we got a frantic phone call that all of the automation stopped working. And what had happened is they had hired a new Jira admin who, maybe with good intentions, went in and deleted some custom fields. And unfortunately, the custom fields were those fields that we used in those automations, and the solution single-handedly broke. So that's what the absence of governance means, is that everybody was freaking out because nobody could submit HR requests anymore to hire, onboard, or change people's roles, right? Now, contrast that with another client, a very large global client with a global Atlassian instance. They're in the food delivery business. And they had a governance structure in place where if you wanted to create a new custom field or wanted to make a change to custom field, you actually had to submit the change ticket from their GSM portal, and that was routed to an admin group who assessed it and only implemented it once they knew what the impact of that change would be. So you see some very different governance approaches, right? And the impact can be pretty significant. Bonnie, thank you very much for that. Before we go to Q&A, just a couple more slides to sort of bring this home. So this is a kind of an interesting slide, and you might think, well, why do we talk about this? So yeah, the USB stick here is maybe a little bit outdated, funny gold here, but the principles are really still very relevant. So when I implemented systems, and when I implemented, for example, a project management office methodology, my CIO always said, we want to have predictable outcomes, and we want people to work in a consistent manner, meaning he was serving on maybe, I don't know, 10 steering committee meetings. And he said, I don't want to go into 10 different steering committees and every project manager does it in a different way. We need to have consistency. We want to measure, monitor risks the same way. For example, we want to manage budget the same way. We want to deal in the same consistent manner how changes are approved, right? Because consistency leads to predictable outcomes. And really, that is what governance, I think, and Bonnie and I think, is really all about. Data is the new gold, right? It's all about the data. You're using Jira, GSM, Confluence. You put those tools in place to support mission-critical operational processes, but then you harvest data that allows you to make decisions. And if those tools are not used in a consistent manner, leading to a lack of predictability, you don't really get the data out of your systems to support decision makers in making those decisions. So with the last slide, handing back over to Bonnie, I just want to talk a little bit about, how we can help, right? Because this is obviously our bread and butter, and we are very passionate. So Bonnie, how can Valiantys help in that area of governance?
Well, we do like to, one of our core values is that we want to make every interaction remarkable. I might be messing up the words there a little bit, but and so even this governance webinar, we offer free training on our YouTube site. And we also provide some free training in written form. I actually worked on a white paper about how you can establish process governance and Atlassian tool governance when I was working with Tempo. You may not have to work with governance activities because you have a wild, wild west system from the start, but you may have to establish governance because of acquisitions. And so Tempo, your happy app provider, actually acquired multiple different companies, and they brought them all together, and they were all operating in different ways. And so I worked with them to establish a unified ways of working process and to establish a unified ways of working tool solution in their Jira system. And so we wrote a white paper together on that, and we invited them to this governance webinar, was it last summer sometime? So Brianna, if you're putting those links in the chat, you can access those if you're interested in reading about that. So that's what we offer for free. Of course, you can learn about our activities there. But also, we do have a governance training, what we call a boot camp, similar. Our Jira boot camps are 3 days, but the governance boot camp is 1 day. It does go very nicely with the Jira boot camp, though, if you want all of your governance boards to truly understand the Jira system, the combination of those would work really well. And that's where we walk through decision making and understanding the process of governance and defining what some of those architectural decisions would be. But more commonly is our governance transformation activities. We work with clients. I have several right now that I'm working with leading some teams through governance transformation assessments, where we work with your stakeholders. We do a forensic analysis of your current systems, and we decide, okay, this is where we have governance broken, and this is where they're doing governance well. This is your entire system of work, not just the Atlassian products, but whether it's Teams or Google or Salesforce or whatever Accolade, Polarian, JAMA, whatever requirements or other tooling solutions you have. And we start building out, okay, what does the future state system of work look like? And how do we want to properly govern that with a good support model, enablement model, good architectural decision making, and all of the change management that's needed to help those teams move into that future model. So that's what we're working on quite often with our clients, and we get started with that assessment typically in a 2 to 4 month engagement to build that roadmap and to take care of any low-hanging fruit, and then any bigger things we can then proceed with follow-on engagements after that, or you can take it on as your own. So, but that is what I would be happy to talk with any of you about any of those types of activities. So feel free to reach out to me or Dietmar about those. Do we have
Yeah, and I
any
was,
questions?
uh,
Yeah.
I just also posted the link to our training site, which many of you probably are aware of. Bonnie mentioned that we're teaching boot camps. I just finished teaching a 2-day Jira Service Management boot camp last night, and that's where we will really, really dive into the details to enable your admins to be successful, right? That's really, really, really important. There's a lot to properly administer those tools, and those workshops, multi-day workshops, are very hands-on. So just mentioning this. Yeah, Bonnie,
Yeah.
just one question that comes up is if bad governance is in place today, what do we do to rescue and switch a bad governance model over into successful governance? I mean, in all reality, where do you start, right? Once upon a time, GSM, Jira has gone live with hurrah and all great. And now 3-4 years later, you find yourself in a spot, it's not working quite so well. How do you pivot from a bad governance structure to a successful governance structure to rescue it?
The first thing that comes to mind is the first step is admitting you have a problem. But then the next step is to assess the extent of your problem. It's figure out, okay, where is our governance going well and where is our governance failing? And it might be failing in everywhere, or it might just be failing in one key area that's impacting us greatly. And so that makes you think everything's horrible, but really it's just one gap that needs to be addressed. But assess that, figure out, okay, where is our governance failing? And how do we address that? Well, then you need to start making those decisions. Okay, do we, if it's our support model that's really the place where we're falling apart, then let's go ahead and establish our governance documentation, make sure that we have all of those practices captured, and start capturing what should our support model be. Or if it's really about the wild west in your Jira system, what we've often done, and this happens a lot, where especially when it's a grassroots Jira system that gets handed to IT and IT has to clean it up, define what is that future state going to be. Let's really make the good architectural decisions of what should our Jira system look like, and then start making the transition plans. And it takes time, especially if you incorporate good change management so that you're not making all of your end users go nuts. But I won't say it's easy, but it ends up with a system that's going to be much more powerful and automated and valuable for
Yeah. And one thing I want to contribute to that is I think it very much comes down to leadership and executive sponsorship. Because
that.
governance at the end of the day needs to be driven from your leadership team because it, let's be realistic, affects people's day-to-day jobs and roles. And those are sometimes not easy conversations. So governance really needs to be driven by senior leadership. And if senior leadership is not at the table, I think the chance to stand up successful governance is maybe somewhat reduced. I saw this in some of the work that I did, where we did, for example, Jira health check assessments, and the team that we worked with, they were very engaged, but there was really lack of senior steering and governance, and then unfortunately the chance that it sees the light of day is somewhat diminished. So you want to make sure that your leadership team is on site and they're driving it with the vision and they are empowering people to implement it. That's, when I was a project manager, my first question always was, well, who is my sponsor? And what's the sponsor's need? And that was the first conversation. And if nobody was willing to stand up and be the sponsor, then I said, well, why are we doing the project to begin with if nobody wants it to be done, right? So likewise, on ongoing long-term governance, senior leadership needs to drive it.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we are at time. First of all, thank you again so very much for having joined us today. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's a really important topic. The horizon of maintaining systems, keeping people engaged, making sure the systems we build keep on functioning well beyond that go live date. And this is what this conversation is really all about. So thank you for joining us. Please do stay in touch. Please reach out if you have any questions. You can find us via email, on LinkedIn, go to our YouTube channel, go to our website, go to our training site. There is lots of content. We would love to stay in touch with you. So wishing everybody a great day and thanks again for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.